Hey folks, well today we are in a very historic place in Scotland, the Battle of Bannockburn. This is one of the most famous battle scenes in Scotland. Let me tell a little bit of history behind this. So we go all the way back to the 13th century when King Alexander III, the King of Scots, died without an heir. He had only a daughter, Margaret, but she never got crowned. So this started this sort of a civil war within Scotland. Who's going to be the next king? The guy that became a king was John Beaulieu, one of the noblemen in Scotland, but he was appointed by, at that time, King of England. He was helped by King of England Edward I, the Longshanks, also known as the Hammer of Scots because of his ill treatment of Scottish people. Of course, Scottish people didn't like English king telling them who should rule Scotland. So that only prolonged the civil war, or who should be the rightful king. Another nobleman came to the front. His name was Robert the Bruce. He was one of the Scottish noblemen, and he said, no, I will be the rightful king of this land. And basically it started this conflict that lasted for a few decades. Robert the Bruce was fighting the English. English were sending garrisons to fight here in Scotland. Eventually, Edward I died, and his son, Edward II, who was much weaker than his father, he didn't have the stamina and the bravado of Edward I. Eventually, it all crescendoed with Edward II sending an army to try to crush this Scottish rebellion here at the Battle of Bannockburn. The English sent an army, some say as large as 20,000 strong. Now the Scots only had an army about 7,000 to 10,000, so they were outnumbered 1 to 2 or maybe more. What happened next is historic. Against all odds, Robert the Bruce, the claimant to the throne, the King of Scotland, faced them off in the fields that we're gonna see right now, and he defeated the English. And the victory was so crushing that as much as 1,500 Englishmen died. About 50 barons and knights and nobility of England perished in this battle, with Scotland only losing about 100 people. It was a crushing defeat, and that cemented Scottish supremacy. And basically that led to 10 years from then to England having a treaty with Scotland and leaving them alone for a long time. So, you know, sometimes you'll hear this as a war for independence. It's not really, because Scotland was already independent, but this cemented Scotland from torment of the English kingdom. And so what we're gonna do today is we're gonna walk in. There's a center there in the fields and the monuments, and we're gonna learn about this battle and see what we can find out. And if you're a fan of pop culture, of course you might have seen the movie Braveheart. Well, this battle that we're talking about here, that's the battle in the very ending of the movie where Robert the Bruce goes and defeats England, and then he throws his sword in the air, and it's like Scotland gained their freedom. That's the battle. Of course, the main protagonist, William Wallace, by that time was long dead, but he played this instrumental part in Scotland's fight for its independence that was then taken upon by Robert the Bruce, who finished the fight and crushed the English. So let's go in and learn this amazing history together. All right, as you can see, here's the Battle of Bannockburn Center. So let's go in and look-see.
I have to give you the context, of course. So we do that by showing you two short films. The first one is narrated by Sir James Douglas. He was the commander and one of his closest pals. He is actually the only guy we ken of that managed to storm a castle dressed as a Highland cow, so he is pretty mental. He actually did in real life dress up as a Highland cow. So I'll press play and you can meet him.
Around the year 1290, a series of unfortunate deaths left Scotland in dire need of a rightful heir, a king. King Edward I of England was asked to step in to judge the claims to the throne. But King Edward's intentions were not all they seemed, and Edward invaded Scotland, ruling it as an English province. In 1302, a Scottish aristocrat by the name of Robert Bruce, who had pledged allegiance to Edward, married 13-year-old Elizabeth de Burgh in Essex. Robert held a claim to the Scottish throne, as did his bitter rival John Comyn. But while Bruce now chose to give his allegiance to Edward I, Comyn led Scottish resistance to the English king. In 1306, Robert Bruce agreed to meet John Comyn at Greyfriars Church in Dumfries. Tempers flared, and Robert stabbed his rival, leaving his henchmen to finish the job. Outlawed by Edward and excommunicated by the Pope, Robert Bruce defiantly took the throne at Scone. Who was supporting Robert Bruce? People like me, James Douglas. I needed to get my lands back. Others loathed English taxes or wanted a Scot on our ancient throne. But many in Scotland hated Bruce for killing Comyn and taking Baliol's crown. They fought with Edward to catch this jumped-up murderer. In those days, even I didn't believe this so-called king could get my lands back for me. King Edward's men defeated Robert's army, killed his brother, captured his queen, his sisters, and his daughters. Robert Bruce sought refuge in remote islands where he regained his conviction to fight. Sometime later, he heard of the death of Edward, and over the next 6 years ran a campaign to gain the support of his countrymen and women, which he accomplished. But his queen, the only one capable of giving him a natural heir, was still imprisoned in England. Robert regained control of most of Scotland, capturing English strongholds one after another, but had yet to take Stirling Castle. Robert's forces lay siege to it. Eventually, the commander in charge agreed to hand over control of the castle if it were not reached by the English army by Midsummer's Day, 1314. So the English, led by Edward II, marched north to fight.
Edward was a strong King of England. In 1291, he supported John Baliol's claim to be King of Scotland. However, in 1296, he sought to tighten his grip on Scotland by removing John Baliol and taking power himself. At times, it looked like he had succeeded, but several years later, a formerly loyal aristocrat, Robert Bruce, defied King Edward and had himself crowned King of Scotland. Edward's army marched north to crush the rebellion. But on the way, King Edward fell ill and died. The crown of England fell to his son. Along with his father's crown, Edward of Carnarvon inherited the responsibility to deal with the Scottish rebellion and his father's substantial debts. My lords and ladies, I am Isabella of France, daughter of King Philip the Fair of France, and I was betrothed to this man, Edward of Carnarvon, when I was 8 years old. With the full approval of two very powerful royal households, in 1308, I took Edward of Carnarvon to be my husband. There was great pomp and ceremony. Within weeks, we were crowned King and Queen of England. A less than perfect affair, due in no small part to the presence of one Piers Gaveston. Before the coronation festivities were over, it became clear to me that I was not the king's favorite. He preferred the company of his long-term friend, Piers Gaveston, a man much hated by the barons of England, for he was given power, land, and income that he did not deserve. And soon, they could bear it no more. The barons hunted him down and murdered him. And for a while, Edward turned his attention back to England and to me. But the rebellion in Scotland, led by Robert Bruce, is all but complete. And now, England has no choice. It must form an army, and it must reach Stirling Castle before Midsummer's Day, or the garrison there will kneel before the Scots.
Would have looked in 1314. There have of course been a lot of changes to the landscape over the centuries, but some things do remain the same. Up here we have Stirling Castle. It's still there, it's not moved, although back in 1314 it was actually a mostly wooden structure with a stone keep inside it, and Sir Philip Mowbray, he's the keeper of the castle. He has about 60 men in there with him. The castle overlooks Stirling Bridge. Right here, that's the site of another famous battle. That time it was Sir William Wallace and Sir Andrew Murray again battling the English in the area, so that was in 1297, right at the very beginning of the Wars of Independence. This big brown line running through the middle of the map, that is in fact the Roman road. The Romans did make it up this far. They even made it up to Aberdeen. 3 times they tried to conquer what is now Scotland, and 3 times they failed. And it is a common misconception that Iron Age Britain had never had roads before the Romans came. We did, it's just that the Romans did it better. And actually parts of this road was actually excavated last year. These silvery lines, these are our burns. So a burn is a Scots word for a stream. Both of those burns meet and flow into the River Forth right here. And at the time of the battle, these burns were wider, they were deeper, and they were tidal as well. So the water level did actually rise and fall throughout the day. Some of the areas around these burns is quite tricky to pass, particularly the Bannockburn here. You've got steep 40-foot gorges, you've got bushes, you've got trees, you've got all sorts that's going to get in your way. So most people, and particularly armies, would pass here at Milton Ford. It's a very narrow crossing. You can get about 3 men at a push on horseback over there. That's where most people would travel through. And where you're all standing right now is right here. This was called the New Park, not new anymore of course. It was a hunting park that was enclosed for Alexander III back in the middle to the late 13th century. So, back to the battle. When Bruce hears about this deal made for Stirling Castle, he's got about 4, perhaps 6 weeks to prepare his men before the deadline for the castle, and he does that. He prepares his men in an area known as the Torwood, which is just off the bottom of a map right here. And he is training his men to fight in a Schiltron formation. So Schiltron in Old Scots pretty much just means like a big group of men. And each of these men has a spear, which is about 12 to 13 foot long, so it's a lot bigger than my wee stick right here. And the men in the front row are crouched down and they have their spear at an angle. The men behind those are having standing with their spears over the shoulders of the men in front. And again, the men behind them are standing with their spears over the shoulders of the men in front. Until then, what you've created is a massive wall of spears. This is very, very effective at repelling cavalry. If you want to take apart a Schiltron, you want archers. Archers are excellent, just poking holes in a Schiltron so the infantry or the cavalry can get in and break it apart. So Bruce has trained his men. He then hears that the English army have reached Falkirk on the 22nd of June. That's when he pulls his army out of the Torwood and has them camp up here in the New Park, where we are now. But when he has his men crossing over Milton Ford right here, he has them dig honeycomb pits at either side of the Roman road. And he's doing that specifically to narrow the formation of the English army, because Bruce is severely outnumbered. He only has about 7,000 men in his army. The English army is about 20,000 men strong, so there's a big difference right there. So he's really making sure that his men are taking on as little men of the English army as possible at a time. And he may also have dispersed a whole bunch of these. Now that is a caltrop. It is 4 iron nails welded together, and any way that you fling this thing down, it will land with a spike pointing upwards. It's designed to stab into the soft part of a horse's hoof or a very unfortunate soldier's foot. Now, there's no any direct evidence that they were used here, but they were used in other places round about the same time, so it's reasonable to assume that if Bruce had access to them, he would have used them. And actually my colleague who's not in today, he has had the very unfortunate experience of standing on one of these. It actually went right through his foot, broke the bones in his foot, poking at the top of his skin. Very gross, very painful. So just put the share off, you're welcome. It didn't happen here. He's absolutely fine to walk about the park. Out the back, Warwick is actually a reenactor, and there was beer involved, so you can pretty much guess how something like that did happen. He's fine now, thankfully. Yeah, so back to the battle. So Bruce has trained his men, he's prepared the landscape. The English army are at Falkirk, that's only 13 miles away, very, very close indeed. So the English army arrive at Milton Ford on the 23rd of June. They arrive at the back of 3 in the afternoon. And you know, Stirling Castle is very, very close. It is only 2 miles away. They just have to get to it. So the cavalry advance over Milton Ford. They would really like to cross over the ford, spread out and overwhelm the Schiltrons, but the traps and perhaps the Caltrops are preventing the English army from doing that. So they actually can't get through these Schiltrons. They have to find another way up to the castle. They can't go forward because the Scots are blocking the road. They can't go home because they really want to keep that castle. Stirling is a very, very strategic castle to have. It is said that if you control the castle, you probably control the bridge, which means that you can control the flow of traffic up and down to and from the Highlands. So they really want to keep it. If they choose to go west to get up to the castle, they're going to have to manage 2 bogs, so they need to go around Gillies Hill, around the Pelstream Burn that way, and up to the castle that way. Now 20,000 men, thousands of horses and hundreds of wagons over a hilly boggy landscape is not ideal at all. It's really going to slow that army down. So the English army decide to send a few hundred knights east, around the Great Ditch right here, and down over the narrow points of the Bannockburn, up behind the Schiltrons. But when they get to that point there at St Ninians, they actually encounter a group of Scottish soldiers. These soldiers there form up in an oval Schiltron, just like was used at the Battle of Falkirk. But unlike Falkirk, this Schiltron holds for them because it's cavalry that's attacking it. It is not archers. And for ages, the English army circle that Schiltron, and they become so frustrated at the lack of impact, they actually chuck their weapons at the Scots in frustration, and then they come back down to settle on the Cairns. And that's where the rest of the English army settle for the night. And they actually pull off doors and roofs from some of the cottages in the area to make wee makeshift bridges to go over the narrow points of the Bannockburn. And I think that this is actually not such a bad place for them to be because it is flat, so that's quite handy. The whole army is in fact down there. It's pretty tight because it's quite a narrow space, but all of them are down there. And the burns there, they actually provide a level of protection for the English army. Like I say, the difficult terrain to pass means it's unlikely that the Scots will attack them in the middle of the night. And these burns will provide fresh drinking water for the men and for the horses as well. So it's, for them at that moment, it's quite a good place for them to stay. However, that is a Cairns. And Cairns in Old Scots pretty much means floodplain. And so even though it was hard and it was dry when the English first went down there, once you get 20,000 men, thousands of horses, hoofs and hundreds of wagons, doesn't stay dry very long. Very quickly it turned into a mucky mess down there. Now it could not have been very pleasant at all for anybody down there. Remember, these men have just marched 13 miles from Falkirk. They have been marching for days before that. There's a lot of confusion in the English ranks because command has been split between 2 men, which is not how it was supposed to go. Plus, Bruce has also implied a scorched earth tactic. That has meant that he has burned and cleared the land of any way that the English army can refuel themselves by the time they get here. So not only have these guys been marching for days, they're probably hangry as well. It could not have been very pleasant for them indeed. But that's pretty much it for day 1, everybody. It's not very exciting. There's a skirmish at St Ninians, there's another one here in the new park, but we'll tell you more about that out there. So day 1 is done for about back at 6 in the afternoon. Day 2, everything changes on day 2. Bruce actually gets his army up at dawn, so that's about 25 past 3 in the morning for this time of the year. And then he has his army form up at Balquiderick Ridge. And this is a huge surprise for the English army because this isn't what Bruce does. He's a hit and run type of guy, he's a guerrilla warfare type of guy, and here he is, he's only got 7,000 men, and he's facing down an army of 20,000 men. So the English cavalry who are at the front, they jump onto their horses and they attack these Schiltrons. But like we've seen for the day before, they just can't break them apart, so they are forced to pull back. This is when Bruce employs the tactic that he was really training his men for in the Torwood. He wasn't just training them to stand still with their spears, he was actually training them to advance. So if you can think about it in your head, you've got blocks of 2,000 men, semi-crescent shaped blocks, and each of them has a spear which is about 13 feet long, and they are marching towards you in unison. That must have been quite a frightening sight. So when this cavalry here pull back, these Schiltrons advance and use up that space. The cavalry again try to attack the Schiltrons, they try to break them apart, but they just can't do it. They are forced back. The Schiltrons again use up that space. Now you can see here why Bruce deliberately blocked the road up here. He deliberately never used the mobile Schiltrons on the day before, because if he did, the English would never ever have camped down there on day one. And so the Scots just keep squeezing the English army into an ever tighter position down there. What they thought was a good deal of protection from the night before has actually become the biggest trap that they could have walked into. And the English army are too tight down there for the cavalry to pull back to let the archers move through and attack these Schiltrons. And the archers were stuck at the back. There was no high ground for them, so they couldn't possibly shoot through their own men to get to the Scots at the front. And it goes so well for the Scots that Bruce decides to get stuck into the action. He's got his eyes set on the King of England in there. And the advisors to Edward II, they must be panicking, because this is not how it's supposed to go. You know, there are 20,000 men, they even had a road right up to the castle, but here they are down here on the Carse, and it has all gone horribly wrong. So the advisors to Edward II think, well, what we're going to do with the king, we need to get him to safety. So they think, well, remember, Stirling Castle is still in English hands. We'll stick him in there and he'll be fine. The problem with that is Sir Philip Mowbray, he's the keeper of the castle. He can see everything that's going on down here on the Carse, and he kens, fail as Edward II in that castle, as soon as the Scots have finished in here, they're going to go right out of that castle, they're going to surround it, and the only way that Edward II will get out is if he concedes that Bruce is the rightful King of Scotland. He'll probably have to forfeit parts of northern England as well. So when Edward II demands to be let into that castle, Sir Philip Mowbray, very bravely, says no chance. Edward II actually has to flee all the way back down to Dunbar. From Dunbar, he takes a ship back to Berwick, back to safety. So he's fine. That guy's all right. Lives on behind him. He left his army down here on the Carse. These guys have seen the King's banner flee. Maybe they're thinking, well, if he's no staying, we're no staying. And quite rightly so. Some of the men actually do make over the burns and they try to get into Stirling Castle, but again, Sir Philip Mowbray says, no, you're not getting in. So the English army do the very sensible thing. And you go back the way that they came, because they can't get out of the burns. Problem with that is there's about 18,000 men left by this point, and it is very, very mucky, and maybe it's a panic, maybe guys are just running near the bridge, and maybe somebody falls, and who's going to help them up? You know, is somebody going to help them up? Maybe the guys are just running through the burn and it's high tide. We didn't ken the particulars of the situation, but what we did ken is that 7,000 men drowned in that burn down there. They didn't die for their injuries on the battlefield, they actually drowned trying to escape. Now, the Scots army didn't give chase. And there's two reasons that could be. Firstly, was to stop the 11,000 men of the English army that would no manage to escape, was to stop them regrouping and coming back and finishing what they started the day before. And secondly, the Scots army didn't get paid. They get paid in the loot. So they have to volunteer 40 days service to their king, pretty much at their own expense. So they get paid in whatever they can find on the battlefield, whether that is food, weapons, armour, clothing, you know, furniture, tents, whatever it is. They get to keep 2/3 of that find, and the last third gets moved up the ranks to their sheriff, landowner, superior, whoever it is that's in charge of them. And that's why we have no artefacts left, because everything was cleared from the site. In the weeks after Bannockburn, it's Bruce's turn here at Stirling Castle, and he is tearing it down like he did with the rest of them that he tamed back for the English, so it can never be held against the people of Scotland ever again. And then in November of 1314, he's over here at Cambus Kenneth Abbey, which you can still go see today actually, it's a really lovely ruin. And this is where he is carving up Scotland to best suit him. So all the men who weren't loyal to him throughout his campaign, or who didn't recognise his kingship, he actually confiscates their lands, their title and their income, and then he uses these items to reward the men who were loyal to him. So people like the Douglases that you met in the first video, the Keiths, the Hayes, the Randolphs, the Stewarts, they're all rewarded for their service. And that ensures that the next time that there's a battle or an invasion or a skirmish or something's going on, Bruce can confidently call upon these men to support him, because as long as Bruce or one of his successors are on the throne, these guys get to keep their comfy castles and their income. This is also the point where Bruce can officially trade the hostages that he's managed to gather from the aftermath of this battle. So for one guy alone, the Earl of Hereford, who was the co-leader, or one of the co-leader of the English army, he is actually traded for 6 very important people. So for him, Bruce can now get back his wife, Queen Elizabeth. He can get back his only legitimate child, Princess Marjorie. He can get back 2 of his sisters, Christian and Mary, and he can also get back Bishop Wishart and Bishop Lamberton. And these men, those 2 men, were instrumental in Bruce becoming king. And the return of his queen, his wife, Queen Elizabeth, that means he can now continue his dynasty, because even though he's got a daughter there, of course it's medieval Scotland, he's wanting a son to inherit his throne, and he and Elizabeth, they do have a son. Some years later they have David II, who rules for quite a long time actually. He's seen as quite a successful King of Scotland, but when he dies he leaves no heirs. So the crown actually falls through Marjorie Bruce, who was returned in the hostage exchange right here, to her son. The crown falls to her son. Her son is in fact Robert II. Robert II is the very, very first Stewart king that we have here in Scotland. So if it wasn't for Bruce winning here at Bannockburn and getting Marjorie back, we would never have had Mary Queen of Scots. We would never have had James VI, who also becomes James I of England. You can even trace King Charles III the Day back to Robert Bruce. It is tricky, yes it's tricky, but you can in fact do it. He's like a 20-something great granddad. You know, so the implications from this battle really do ripple out throughout the history of Scotland and the other 3 countries that make up the UK. That is in fact the best sound effect. Okay, so here we are on day 2 of battle. This is the Scottish army forming up at Balquidderich Bridge. And they kneel in prayer. Edward II actually sees them kneeling in prayer and presumes that they are praying to him for mercy and that they were given up. We'll never know what they were praying for, but we do know that they did not give up. So over here, you're going to see the Earl of Gloucester here. He is the other co-leader of the English army. He is nephew to Edward II. He is brother-in-law to Robert Bruce. And you would assume, because he's such a high-standing man, that if he was unhorsed, he would be asking back to his family for a very pretty penny. But he is unhorsed. Back of the Schiltron you have somebody called a shooter, and it is their job to drag anybody a bit clear in the English army, and he is riding a destrier. So that is a war horse. This thing is trained to kick, bite and trample pretty much everything in its path, and it even comes with its own armour. Over here we have Sir Robert Keith. He's leading a very hastily gathered cavalry, so they're riding ponies, Scottish army riding ponies, so they're smaller, faster horses. Again, there's a big difference in the numbers. The Scottish army have about 500 in the cavalry, the English army have about 3,000. The English army, there are no archers in the Scottish army at this time. And red there, he's using a longbow or a warbow, whatever you prefer to call it, and he's been training since he was 7 years old. He was very, very good at what he does. It was actually written in English law that you have to train every Sunday after church. The man in brown there, he has a crossbow. Now you can learn how to do that in one afternoon. It does take a while to reload though, and you can only fire about 2 bolts per minute, but it is a much harder harder hitting weapon, and that's the trade-off with that one there, that it's speed versus impact. The Pope actually outlawed the use of that weapon, said it was too brutal to be used against Christian souls, but the English army did bring 300 of them to Bannockburn. And the new park's right about where we're standing right now. He is at the front of his army. He is making sure that his men don't flee. Remember, these guys know that they are severely outnumbered, at least 2 to 1. So Bruce is doing his best now. So King Robert Bruce is actually a seasoned warrior. So it does its goal and between somebody in the English army and somebody in the Scottish army. Now, it's actually almost impossible to tell, so unless you can make out some sort of motif on your opponent's back, if you're or their armour, if you are stepping of the Baron's letter, which is more commonly known now as the Declaration of Arbroath. That did see the Pope and France recognising once again Scotland's independence and Bruce's kingship. But it's not until 1328 that England has the same point of view, and by that time it is Edward III who's on the throne, so he's the grandson who all this noise started with. So Bruce is going to tell you a bit more about what happened in these 14 years. Some of you might recognise the voice of the actor that does our Bruce. He does have movie links with the Wars of Independence, so there's a wee clue. See if you can figure out who he is, and I can actually at the end. I'm going to press play, and you can find out what went on.
The Schiltron lines pushed forward, and Edward's army had no room to manoeuvre. The crush became so bad that Edward's army fled across the Bannockburn. The burn was steep, and many died trying to make it across. So many that, after a while, the burn could be crossed with dry feet. A shocked King Edward had to be dragged by his horse's reins from the field. Edward fled to Stirling Castle, but was denied entry. He was chased east to Dunbar, where he escaped by ship to England. Edward's baggage train, now undefended, was plundered by the victorious, allowing more survivors to flee the field. With thousands lying dead on the battlefield, there was valuable armour and weaponry to collect. The encampments were dismantled, leaving very little trace. Many English knights were captured and their lives spared for ransom. An exchange of prisoners ensured the release of Elizabeth, who was being held captive. She was brought to York for her release. Following the great victory, the Scots took the war to the English. 4 years later, Edward's Queen Isabella
was repeatedly nearly captured in the same city during a raid far across the border by the victorious forces, who had found a new confidence in striking out across northern England and also at English supporters in Ireland. All of which was an attempt to pressure Edward into negotiating with them. There were some who never forgot how the king took the throne. The Pope had excommunicated Scotland in an attempt to stop the fighting, and this needed to be addressed. 50 Scottish nobles gave their support to a letter declaring Scotland as an independent nation and one that should be recognised by the Pope. All the while, some of them were plotting to kill the king and put John Balliol's son Edward Balliol in his place. Still, the traitors were severely dealt with, and eventually France and the Pope recognised the king. In contrast, south of the border in 1321, Edward faced rebellion. His barons were angered by his new favourite, Hugh Despenser the Younger, who masterminded the king's triumph over his rebellious cousin, the Earl of Lancaster. The new regime was unpopular, tyrannical and corrupt, all of which served to take Edward's attention away from Scotland. In 1324, the future of Scotland became more clear because of the birth of twin sons to the king. David was born and lived, the next generation of Scottish royalty. England's monarchy was in trouble. Edward once again thought he could do exactly as he pleased. Queen Isabella abandoned her husband and with a lover, Roger Mortimer, began to plot his downfall. And so her son, Edward III, came to the throne while her husband died a mysterious death. In 1328, Queen Elizabeth of Scotland died. I, Robert Bruce, am now very old and very ill. But today, a treaty was sealed at Edinburgh, which sees it agreed that Scotland is an independent nation, although there can never be any guarantee that this war will end for good. My son, David, will rule Scotland.
Right here we have the Borestone. It's quite important to us here at Bannockburn. Traditionally speaking, the Borestone was a round millstone that was brought up from Milton Ford before the battle and placed up there in the new park. And there's a wee plaque next to the flagpole that marks the very spot where that was placed. And it was placed there as a marker for Bruce to raise his banner before the battle, so all his men would know where to gather. And right here, the red line rampant, that is actually the banner of the Kings of Scots. You'll still see today, it's all over the place, and that would have been raised so his men would know where to gather. But we do have a wee bit of a problem with this stone because the Battle of Bannockburn was in 1314, but we didn't have any historical reference to it until the 18th century, so there's a good few centuries in between. But that doesn't mean to say it's not true. You know, of course it could still be true. These things are passed down in local legend all the time. Or it could just be a nice story. You know, I'll leave it for you to make up your own mind. But plenty of people did believe it to be true, so much so that in the 18th century folk would come and visit the site. And because we never had a gift shop to sell them their fridge magnets and bookmarks, they chip a wee bit off that stain and take that away with them instead. And apparently you can still find bits floating about eBay if you fancy having a wee look. Also, to show you in this cabinet right here, we have some replica arms and armour. There's a bit of interpretation that would tell you who they were.
Well, here we are. Look, there's music too. Okay. Let's see. Erected on June 24th, 1870 by Loyal Dixon. Roke of Hope Lodge. Oh, look at that. Here's the monument to this great battle. Wow, fantastic. And here's of course a cairn with a plaque on it. Let's see. For God and St. Andrew, Robert the Bruce King of Scots, planted his standard near this spot when the Scottish patriots, under his command, vanquished the army of Edward II of England at the Battle of Bannockburn, June 24th, 1314. And I guess this is a quote from Bruce himself. "We fight not for glory, nor for wealth, nor honor, but only and alone we fight for freedom, which no good man surrenders, but with his life." Look at that, strong words. Here lies our land, beneath swift clouds, glad glints of sun, belonging to none but itself. We are mere transistents who sing its whistling winds and foreigny bears, northern lights and siller tides, small folk playing our part. Wow, it's beautiful. And of course, look at this right there. Robert the Bruce Monument. Wow. Well, look at this. Here's the famous monument to Robert the Bruce, King of Scots. You see the dates here, 1306 to 1329. I'm assuming that is his reign, of course, because he died much older. This is fantastic because, you know, when you look at this monument, you can sort of just imagine Robert the Bruce, King of Scots, standing on a hill, maybe this one, maybe just one next up to us, on a horse and armor just like this, bravely leading his troops into the battle with wielding an axe, which he will shatter a skull of an enemy knight. How cool is this? And here it says, Her Majesty the Queen, accompanied by His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, unveiled this statue of Robert the Bruce, King of Scots, on the 24th of June 1964, on the 650th anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn. Wow. This is truly amazing, and you can see the face of the king right there. And they say that's actually more or less what historians think his face might have looked like. So, wow. You know, it's amazing how history changes. You know, 650 years ago, the King of Scots and the King of England were deathly enemies. Yet, you fast forward half of a millennium, and a Queen of England and her husband opens up this monument right here. How much has changed, you know, but even then, even today, there's sentiment in Scotland that it has never been quite forgotten. There's still the feelings of distinct culture, distinct state of independence, of sovereignty, stays within the people and their feelings. So it is interesting how things that may be perceived have been long gone and forgotten, they're not, clearly, as manifested by this monument here. It is the battles, the heroic acts, the people, the heroes still live on in people's minds and hearts.
Scots way we Wallace fled, Scots one Bruce as after led. Welcome to your gory bed, port a victory. Now's the hour, see the frontal battle on, see approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery. War will be a traitor knave, War can fill a coward's grave, was say base as be a slave, let him turn and flee. War for Scotland's king and law, freedom's sword will strongly draw. Freeman stand and freeman fall, let him follow me. By oppression's woes and pains, by our sons in servile chains, we will drain our dearest veins, but they shall be free. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties in every blow, let us do our deed. Scots way we Wallace bled, Scots one Bruce has often led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory.